Hello everyone, this is Red Vitus, and you're watching the assembly video of the Hamilton 940. So I took apart this watch and have all the parts clean, but before I begin assembly, there's one repair that has to be done. So looking at the balance staff, there was one broken pivot on the bottom, there next to the roller jewel. So this watch was not running when I received it, and that has to be repaired. The first step will be to remove the hairspring. And I'm using levers for that operation. Just gently get underneath and pry it up. Okay, and there it is. Next, I'll remove the roller table. I'll be using the staking set for this. And here's my roller table remover stump, which I'm placing on the staking set. And the balance arms fit into that stump, and there's a cutaway to protect the impulse jewel. Now with the stake being lowered, I'll punch out the roller table. Just a light tap to remove it. Now it's ready for cleaning. And the next step will be done at the Wolf. That is my Wolf yawn lathe. I'll be cutting out the balance staff. So I'm turning down the hub. You might be able to tell from the color of the balance staff that I've drawn out the temper. So that softens the steel and allows me to cut quite fast. The steel toward the balance, though, is still quite hard, and the cutting gets slower as I move along. Now, this is generally considered a safer way of removing the balance than hammering the rivet through the balance hole, or the hole in the balance arms. So I've turned the hub down to just a slim disc, and then cut off the ring. And that leaves me with a balance ready for restaffing. So I acquired a new staff, and the only test I did there was just verifying that the pivot was the correct size. Now I restaff on the staking set. Find an appropriate hole that fits the balance staff, and then place the balance on top of the new staff, ensuring that it's down all the way to the seat. The first step to form the rivet was to use a rounded stake. And I hammer that in. Then to finish the rivet, a flat stake. And now this stake spreads that rivet, so it works the steel, a cold works the steel, and it forms a secure connection. So tapping and rotating the stake as I go to make sure that I've hammered it in uniformly round. Now it's complete. So it's off to testing, and I'll give it a few blows of air to check the balance motion. And it should spin freely in all positions. In this case, it spun for 1 minute 10 seconds in both horizontal positions. So I was happy with that. I also checked it in the vertical position, and it spun for about 50 seconds. So now I'm looking at each position. There's no issues. But it's a good idea to sight the balance from the edge. And if there's any wobble, that needs to be dealt with for optimum timing results. Here I'm placing the roller table back on. I have the balance up on a stump. And I lower the stake, which has a hole in the center and a cutout to protect the jewel. I'm using very light taps here. If I needed heavy taps, then I would know there's something wrong. So I'm basically just using the weight of the hammer to drive that in. And with that complete, I reinstall the hairspring. And now here I just use a hollow stake, and with hand pressure, push it down into position. And I reinstalled it in the same orientation that it was when it was removed. With the balance complete, it's time to begin assembly. I'll start with the winding pinion. Now I place the winding pinion in this plate, or bridge. Now that bridge, it looks like a rectangle, but there actually is one rounded or more rounded side and one flat side. So I put the pinion facing the flat side. And I'm using HP 1300 oil. There's my head. It's easy to forget to put this winding pinion in, and then you'd have to disassemble the watch if you forget it, or if you forget to tighten a screw. I've learned that from experience. The first screw is always the hardest. So I think all the Hamilton 18S watches have a design like this for the winding pinion. It's a pretty robust design. And now we can assemble the gear train. Here's the pallet fork with that nice crescent counterweight. Then the escape wheel. Now the fourth wheel. You might notice here I'm assembling this on the top plate. So this is actually the upside. I've heard this referred to as the upside down method of assembling this type of movement. Here's the center wheel. And then lastly, the third wheel. Now this next step coming up for full plate 18 size movement is the bane of most hobbyists and probably professional watchmakers, getting that pillar plate set on there. My head did get in the way, so it'll sort of jump ahead where I have the plate already on, but only on 3 of the pivots. So usually I line it up with the center pivot first, then the 4th wheel, and then the 3rd wheel. There's 2 pivots left, the most difficult 2 in my opinion, which are the escape wheel and the pallet fork. And I just work these wheels and just ease them into position. I don't put any pressure on the plate while I'm doing this. And with these pivots that are polished, you'll actually see the pivot as it comes through. They're capped jewels, so it's a little bit more difficult with this Hamilton movement. Okay, now they're all in place. And I'm going to carefully pick this movement up, flip it over, and put it into a larger movement holder where I'll complete the work. So I can only put in 2 of the screws at this point. I have to wait for the barrel bridge for the other 2. I don't tighten these down all the way yet. I want to make sure that the train bridge is free before I screw down permanently. I use this Bergeron stick to hold down the plate. These little helpers are cheap, but they're also invaluable. Now I'm turning the gear a little bit and checking the motion of the pallet fork to verify that the gear train is all in place, and it looks good. So I'll tighten the screws. Now I'm putting in the ratchet wheel. And next comes the barrel. I've disassembled, cleaned, and reinstalled the spring off camera. You might have heard my dog in the background. I went to check on him and forgot to turn the camera back on while I was installing the barrel. So if you're watching this video just to see the barrel installation, then sorry. And I put HP 1300 on the barrel. And the 2 screws for the barrel plate finish it off. Now I finished, refinished some of the parts of this movement, the steel parts. I haven't gotten to the point where I can polish screws, but that's next on my list to do. These screws looked okay for the most part. Now turning the movement over to the pillar side, I'll place some oil on the other side of the barrel. And now I can assemble the keyless works. First part here is the yoke spring and screw. Next, I assemble the yoke and winding gears. Now, this piece is a bushing, serves as the pivot point for that yoke, and I'm placing HP 1300 on it. And that's the yoke, the bottom side of it. And I oil the posts for the other wheels. That serves to lubricate them, but also holds the piece together as I install it, since I have to turn it upside down. This is the intermediate winding gear. That little one is the setting gear. And the largest one is the winding wheel. So now I'm putting it in the movement and aligning it with the post on the plate, and it should pop into place. It's held down by a couple of right-handed screws, but I don't screw them in all the way yet. And I'll show you why in a moment. And next I oil the posts before I forget to do that. So this is 90-10 on the minute wheel. And on the center wheel pivot, I'm using HP 1300. That's for the Canon Pinion. And then I'm also going to place some oil on the pivot. I oiled the other jewels off camera. For the center wheel and third wheel, HP 1300. The fourth wheel and escape wheel was 90-10, and the balance is 90-10. Then for the pallet fork, the impulse jewels, or the pallet jewels, 94-15. Okay, here's the Canon Pinion. Pushing it straight down. And the minute wheel. All right, now I'm placing the other screw into the yoke. Just partially screwing down, because I have to lift the plate just a bit to move the yoke spring into position. There's a post underneath the yoke, that it engages with. Now I can screw it into place fully. And next I'm going to place some oil right on the tip of that end of the yoke. That hammers against the plate, and that's what makes the ratcheting sound when you wind the watch backwards. So we need some oil there. And I also put oil on the other end of the yoke here, which is where the setting lever makes contact. So I polished this yoke before reassembly. It had some corrosion. Now this is the setting lever, or as Hamilton calls it, the shipper. That had some rust, corrosion, and it looked like someone had went at it with a screwdriver, so I refinished that as well. And I'm screwing it in. This is one of the replacement screws that I had to find for this unit. The original one was there, but it had sheared off. I put a little oil on that screw as well, since it does rotate. And I test the action of the shipper. Seems to be working fine. Now I test the watch in the setting position, ensuring that all the gears move. And there should be some resistance when you're setting the time. If there's no resistance, that probably would indicate that the Canon pinion is too loose. Now before I can wind the barrel, I place the click into position. It was oiled off camera. Placed a drop on the post and also on the click spring where they make contact. So here I have the right tools but wrong hands. So a little switcheroo, and that worked better. Nice big click screw there. Finishes off, and now I can do a test wind. You can hear the clicking sound that it makes when you wind from the click engaging with the ratchet wheel. Okay, here's the best part. So there's my newly restaffed balance. And here I'm placing the shim that I used. This is just a small dowel washer. I have a pack of about 100, so more than I'll ever need. And these are I found the perfect thickness for a balanced shim. Until I find a more elegant way to do it, that shim does the job, and it's reversible. So I place the balance cock in place and screw it in. Now I still need to attach the stud, so I did that off camera. Here again, I don't fully tighten that screw. I verify that the balance is free. And now I give it a little bit of a wind, and it starts running right away. And that's good news. So now I can fully screw in the balance. Now I gave this a full wind and let it run for about 10 minutes. Things were looking good, so I put it on the time grapher. And it's running pretty good. It's not great, but it's 233 amplitude is good. And I've regulated it to the timing to 8 seconds per day. The beat error is a little high at 1.8 milliseconds. I like for that to be less than 1, so I'll put that in beat off camera. But I'm going to let this run for a day or two and see where it settles out. And with some adjustment, I improved the beat error to close to 0 with an amplitude of about 245 to 250. And so that's looking much better. Now I can oil the Canon Pinion and install the hour wheel. Now the hour wheel, as the name would suggest, is the post for the hour hand. The Canon Pinion is the post for the minute hand. I've loosened the 3 dial screws already, and I'm placing the dial. Okay, and I'm installing it in the case now. There are 2 case screws. Now this case is rather worn, and some people may have a problem with worn cases, but I really like them. These old cases, these gold-filled cases, they weren't made to last forever, at least not the gold plating. So I think it shows that the watch has been used. And plus there were no other screw marks, so this is likely an original case. So as you can see, I'm putting the hands on. I already have the hour hand installed. Just pressing it down, making sure the hand is parallel to the dial. The minute hand next, similarly pressing it down. And I'm checking to make sure they're not touching each other as I set the time. And now the seconds hand. This is just about done. So here's the finished watch. Really lovely movement and beautiful dial. I love the ones where it says Hamilton Watch Company all across. And for a worn case, for an old watch, really looks spectacular, and it's running great. This is Red Vitus. Thanks for visiting my channel.